the next panel that we have coming up is a panel like, we needed to have a buzzword panel, right? Buzzword AI. So this is the one. Portfolio company of ours, fun side story, some fun anecdote on this. The only deal that we ever did where it didn't take us forever. No, we're not that slow typically, but like this was a deal where we saw the company, we met the team, one single Zoom call, and we had a like unanimous IC decision that we wanted to invest in the company, provide them with a term sheet, and lead their seed round, literally on that call. Only time in our life. That's the level of conviction we had on what they were building. That was about 2.5 years ago now, I think, Kylan, if I remember right. So welcome on stage, Kylan, CEO of Inworld. That's going to share a bit more about what Inworld is doing today. We're going to like head over in a discussion afterwards. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, good to see you. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you all for having me today. So today's presentation is largely going to be sharing some of our learnings of building for the last 3 years of AI for games. Some of it will be not surprising to the folks here. Some of it might be surprising. I'm going to try and be as honest as possible about what we've learned. And so let's get into it. So we started about 3 years ago. We've had the opportunity to work with a ton of different platform integrators, game studios, entertainment companies, and we've learned a lot in that period. So almost 3 years ago, we produced a technical demo called Inworld Origins. And the idea of it was to allow characters to speak and have very basic actions. But it was really the first generation, I'd say, of introducing this new technology. And it was very similar to a chatbot style experience. So, thinking about a ChatGPT style thing with this preceded ChatGPT, but that general conversational flow. And as we've evolved, we've learned that NPCs really aren't enough in terms of just adopting AI for games, and there's a lot more that's needed. And so now we actually have a great team in-house as well of ex-AAA game devs who are constantly working with partners, but also producing demos and prototypes to kind of battle test our own technology. And so the video I'm about to show is produced by one of our designers, Kylan, and it shows a variety of the different building blocks that you can use to produce different AI experiences.
Zenith in position. I have eyes on.
Nomad in position. Snowman, what is your status?
Characters like Nomad and Zenith are powered by Inworld's voice model for live dialogue and voice generation. We power both the content and the delivery of VO, creating more dynamic and immersive gameplay.
Single hostile approaching. Draw them into the tunnel discreetly.
Zenith, can you take this guy out?
Affirmative, but engagement would expose us.
Now Zenith is tapped for non-scripted situational awareness and threat analysis. Hey man, come here for a sec. Looking at the sound meter on the bottom right, we can plug in volume logic to Inworld's character engine, allowing AI characters to identify whether the player is speaking to their team or local enemies.
I have eyes on you, Snowman. Hostiles at your 10 o'clock. Get into position.
In position.
I have eyes on 5 targets. Snowman, identify your targets.
I'll take the big guy on the platform and the guy in red.
Zenith, identify your targets.
I will take the two behind the cranes.
Okay, I'll take the leader. Snowman, on your mark.
On my mark, 3, 2, 1, fire. What you've seen here is a combination of Inworld's character engine, game logic, environmental awareness, and multi-agent director technologies at work. Inworld facilitates the awareness of game state and logic with player activity to generate both improvised and scripted gaming experiences.
Awesome, thank you. So that's mainly showing just bringing together a few of the different building blocks that we have. And what I want to share now is some of the key learnings that we've had over the last few years of actually working with this. So these are some of the things that are real challenges that we encounter with partners who are either going through AI adoption or have already gone through some sort of test of AI adoption, and where they kind of found those kind of main weak points or areas of blockage. So the first one is the reality that the quality bar for AI is very high, and it's also increasing. So it's very easy. I'm sure all of our LinkedIn feeds are filled with 3D models, voice assets, a lot of cool models that are producing stuff. But really, it's the novelty that kind of gets us, because the AI-generated content is generally lower than human-generated content. And we've realized that we can't accept lower quality content just because it's produced by AI, meaning everything needs to meet that same quality standard. Also, we need to have game awareness. So generating great content, whether that's voice dialogue or narrative content, based on a lack of context, means you just produce something that is missing the mark for the player. So you need to actually ingest the game state to produce the AI-generated responses. And also in terms of core game loops. So we've had partners, for example, who have, let's say, types of purchases within their games that require impulsivity. And so if you introduce sales negotiation with an NPC into an impulsive buy game loop, it's going to break the entire system. And so you can't introduce AI just everywhere. You need to be very sensitive to exactly how your monetization works, how your game loop works, and actually how it facilitates versus kind of challenges those. And the two last points is that we've realized that you cannot really achieve the quality bar that you want using the same systems as anyone else. So anybody in this room integrating AI into their game will likely use different models, different systems, different configurations, and that's the only way that you can get it to work. And it takes a lot of time and effort. This is to say, the chances that you're going to get in 1 to 3 months some kind of quality that you want is very, very low. And it actually requires a lot of model customization, custom infrastructure, serving options to actually get it working. And so this means that there's a first mover advantage, and those we've seen adopting AI earlier are now leagues ahead of anyone who's trialing with it today. And so that kind of feeds into the second point, which is that we also need AI systems to be able to actually integrate with existing game stacks. That means whatever engine you use, whatever workflow tools that you use for design time, those can't sort of require an additional piece of work for developers, and we need to bring AI into that kind of standard workflow. And the key thing here is around control. So studios can't lose control of their IP, their data, their core content, their narrative loops, and this means that generative AI needs to be controlled by large logical systems that are tied with the existing game engines, rather than allowing them to be too free-flowing. And finally, it needs to be future-proofed. So every month or week, it seems like now, we're seeing new models come out. And what easily happens is you might integrate some AI game loop and it's super cool, but when the next generation model comes out, the differentiation or uniqueness of your game loop actually gets eroded. And so the systems that we build need to get more powerful as the next generation model can come out, rather than be eroded in their differentiation. And then last, the actual infrastructure needs to be there to actually ensure that this is done economically, scalably, and cost efficient. So that effectively means that we need options that allow us to make sure that costs don't scale linearly, that potentially remove actually all server-side costs altogether, and ultimately introduce more reliability than we can see with public endpoints. So we've had a lot of partners launch experiences first using some public foundation model endpoints, and found that the latency performance was not up to snuff for player experiences, because players are relying on this for core mechanics. And so ultimately, they've ended up having to move to dedicated servers with kind of core SLAs attached to that to ensure that this actually works, meaning the infrastructure piece here is critical. And it actually means that we need a lot of custom support to actually set up that infrastructure for any specific studio or game. And out-of-the-box stuff just barely ever works. And so now I'll share the 3 things that kind of to meet these problems we found we need. So the first is we need game-specific AI components. That means that the kind of general models that we see on the market that are trained to serve every single use case available simply will rarely, if ever, actually meet a quality standard that is needed for production-level games. Meaning we need to actually build core models and systems that are specifically built for games, not for the general AI space overall. And that's something that I think is lacking on the market today. The next thing is that these models actually need to be customized and optimized. So you need to be able to take a model or system that we give you as sort of a generic base and easily adapt that to your specific game, scenario, or needs, and to be able to set it up for different serving options, which I'll get to later. But basically, the same system could potentially be run on the server, or even now distilled to be run locally. And that opens up a lot of new consoles and surfaces for players. Now, having these building blocks is great, but we also need to be able to design flows with them that actually meet specific problems. So we need to be able to strap together all of these components to build flexible systems. I can tell you, out of all the studios we've worked with, every single one has required completely different pipelines. And this means that the tooling required needs to make it easy to kind of actually take a specific solution or problem that you need and build your own pipeline of AI components for that. And then you need to be able to distill that pipeline down to be able to run locally or more efficiently. We've also found that there's kind of there's a few common use cases that need to be had, and we're trying now to think about what are the templates that are kind of making it easier for game studios to get started rather than kind of building from scratch. And the last point is actually one of the main problems with AI today is simply cost. So variable cost, if you're running a game and you don't know if you're going to be spending $1 million a month, $10 million a month, $20 million a month, it makes it extremely hard as a developer to budget that into your game and also to understand how that actually fits with your end economics. So one of the big bets that we're making is on the future of on-device, end-to-end AI systems for games and having those actually integrated with consoles, PCs, so that there's no server-side cost associated with the experience. And this is, I think, one of those areas that is going to unlock the actual potential of this for game studios and allow it to actually be integrated into new types of games. It's a very hard problem, but we think probably within a year we'll have something that is actually able to work end-to-end with the same functionality we have today on server, working locally as well. And last is that we need to have sort of a real-time performance. So what we see happening with AI today is kind of a increasing focus on the AGI, future-proof version of the world. But for games, we need something that is working really fast, efficiently, and it's just a different requirement than for everything else. And so this is to say the infrastructure that we need as well needs to be rethought compared to what is needed for other AI components. So bringing this all together, basically what we, I believe, need to actually make AI work for games is specific AI components that are built for games and real-time experiences. We need to be able to bring those together into pipelines, and then we need to be able to distill those pipelines down to run locally or on kind of custom different infrastructures so that they can work for the cost and performance that you need for your studios. This is basically to say we need to make sure that the tools are flexible enough to allow everyone to adapt them to their needs rather than having a very biased view of actually how to build. And also the reality that we shouldn't push people, for example, towards integrating talking NPCs if that doesn't fit with their game loop. These tools need to be able to adapt to the actual game loops and mechanics that players want and ultimately make it more fun. So now, to continue the conversation, I'm going to welcome out Michael Stewart from M12, Microsoft's investment arm, and Yasmina Benkhoui, who is Strategic AI Partnerships at Nvidia. Jens will be joining us as well to conduct the panel. So thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Kylan. To sort of give this a bit of additional framing in terms of how we look at sort of the AI, like AI breakthrough and advancements and how they factor into like our strategic view on investments in the gaming space. We basically look at it in 3 buckets. Bucket number 1 for us is how AI enables game developers to get more efficient, faster, and have an increasing capability for like pivot and like changes in roadmap and intersections. So there's like a use of AI to give you that capability of lowering your cost in production and in live services, as well as like being faster at the same time. That's bucket number 1. So we love investing in and looking at studios that make good use of that. Bucket number 2 is the bucket of emerging game behavior that we have seen here now on stage in an exciting way. So how does AI like provide and bring forward new game experiences through its application? And bucket number 3, so we love companies that like bring that forward and bring that out that we can potentially invest in. And bucket number 3 is like tools and services and platforms that provide AI technology to companies to potentially accomplish number 1 or number 2. And that is a company where like Inworld sits square in. So that said, question to you first, Michael. You're on the board with us at Inworld, which we're very excited about. What was your thesis? Like, how did you look at Inworld when you made that investment decision?
Yeah, and it's interesting because the time when I met the team, it was a very weird moment when the thesis we were developing was really around the metaverse. And I is in the back of my mind, also thinking about new AI and new use cases for AI, and it kind of collided in my mind. But really, the spark for me came from when I was speaking with the Inworld team about generative AI, which I'd really been looking for some innovative use cases for. We had a lot of the technology going at the time. GPT-3 was in general availability, and there had not really been any startups or any visible demonstrations of the kind of enthusiasm that's all around us now. But it was their background, their expertise in kind of bringing it to production, bringing that kind of AI to production. And then I knew that these types of settings, the fun, entertaining settings, would be there for the technology when it's ready. I think it's more the maturity and experience of knowing how to partner and work within large organizations and staying at the cutting edge of it that helped clinch the decision for me.
Thank you. Yasmina, thank you for joining us here. Your company sort of is a games company in the first place, right? Like, that's where you were born. So we can proudly say that as gaming industry. So you see so much in your position of like companies approaching you. How can we collaborate with Nvidia? How can you empower them? What's some of the things where like it makes you scratch your head? Like some of the things that are really off, where people have a misconception of how AI could potentially like lead to business models, like lead to great products.
Yeah. So this is a great question. I feel like there is a lot of misconceptions around AI solutions currently that we're trying to, help educate developer community as well as users that are not necessarily familiar with AI. Some of them is they think of AI as a plug-and-play solution, which is not true, right? In order to develop AI solutions in production, you need to upskill your teams. You need to make sure that AI is needed in that specific workflow, and it brings a certain value. And another thing that we notice currently, in addition to thinking that it's a plug-and-play solution, is that a lot of people tend to think that AI is going to go after their jobs, etc. Whereas you still need human in the loop in order to train these models, provide feedback, make sure that they correspond to your needs, fine-tune them, etc. So I feel like these are the two biggest misconceptions that we're seeing as of now.
So a question that's probably a bit for the entire group. Kylan, you touched on a very important point that is like you're starting to like offload or like put like the compute consideration onto local device, on premise, right? So, but there is experiences, particularly greater like multiplayer experiences, or more open world experiences where that potentially conflicts because every player in concurrency has to see those characters and that they might even interact with each other. Right? Which brings forward totally new experiences. Now, very compute intensive, at the same time difficult to then take local compute to do that. How do you expect that path to these experiences with and you bringing down costs there to like look like in the next years?
Yeah, so the way we see it happening is once we have everything working locally end to end, you can introduce new hybrid solutions. So this means you might have certain parts. So it's very similar actually. If you have a Unreal powered multiplayer game, the rendering and everything is happening locally. Unreal is running locally, but it's receiving those commands from the server side, which is basically managing, let's say, the multiplayer scenario. It's sending back some triggers to a local command. It's updating the current game state. So there's this kind of speaking between the two systems. So the AI is operating locally. You can kind of think about that like some local actor, right? So you have these local actors that each player is actually interacting with that is sort of a local instantiation of the AI. Then you have a special system that kind of lives on the server that is kind of speaking to those local instances. And so what that means is that a lot of the hard compute around like LLM inference, text-to-speech, different systems end up actually being run locally, and that makes it a lot cheaper. Well, you still allow the kind of complex computing that manages the multiplayer scenario, or let's say in a large open game, sort of the coherence of the environment as things change within it. You allow that to kind of operate on the server side. And so we see this kind of new world being where you have the ability, at least, for a player to run it locally. And then there's also options where, let's say a job becomes too intensive, it can actually send it to the cloud as an option. And then you have this director system living. And so it's kind of this multi-layered system where the goal is to basically make it as efficient as possible and reduce the overall cost while maintaining the maximum control and flexibility for the overall experience. And I think this is ultimately how it will evolve, and how we see AI working in games in a few years will be very similar to how existing manually built logic and commands work within game engines today.
Any other areas and any other companies you work with or collaborate with where you see similar approaches taking place in other like target audiences or customer groups?
Yeah, I can cite one example. So currently we're working on customer service agents or avatars. And for the most part, when we released our solution, ACE, Avatar Cloud Engine, it was mainly targeted for the cloud, so at the initial stage. And then what we noticed is when our partners are deploying these solutions in production, for example, let's say you have a kiosk in an airport. you don't necessarily want to be hitting the cloud every time you need to provide a response. So what we're providing now is a local kind of solution where you're able to run your animation. We have small language model to provide answers or anything related to the knowledge about specific products, etc. So this kind of decision about whether we should be on the cloud or we should be local depends on the use case you're trying to serve. So this is what we're seeing now. Being able to serve all use cases is paramount.
Michael, we have a thesis at BITKRAFT that we believe that a lot of the companies in gaming are oftentimes like driving technology forward first, case in point, Nvidia, and sort of it then transcends to other industries. Now, is Inworld a company where you feel like how they go about like building like virtual characters, identities, like they might be in a position where they're like better or faster to market in like serving other adjacent spaces beyond gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I totally believe the first company with the technology to make whatever you want to call the intelligence in the cloud humane, easy to work with, enjoyable, like your friend or companion, someone you know and trust. It's actually it's a jump ball. Anyone that gets to this first will start building the audience faster. It could be any kind of company, including startups, and I have full confidence that Inworld will be right there at the front of the pack.
Over to you, Kylan. Have you any concrete examples? Anything, I don't know, FMCG, other spaces where you've been like already working with, collaborating with, where your technology is applicable?
Yeah, I don't know the right term for it, but what I'm seeing come up is this thing like what I call gamified media. So Duolingo is always the great example of this. So you have kind of apps, whether they're education, whether they're kind of training, whatever these different areas, where it's basically using game mechanics, but in different industries. And I think this is already where you see Unreal being used, for example, in simulation. So one area I see is simulation, which can be used for, public sector. It can be used for lots of different things, for economic simulation. There's some groups that we're talking with at Stanford that are using it for social sciences and these kinds of areas. Then there's, I think, this kind of just gamified media, which frankly I think is everybody's learning that games work really well to engage with players, and that will transcend into how do ads look in the future? How do you interact with an experience that is actually a learning experience? So those are the large ones that were coming up. So basically, like training, education, advertising, brand representation, all of those, and thinking about actually how do we make those basically into games? So it's almost like how do we just make the rest of the industries that exist into a gamified experience, and therefore it naturally transcends the technology.
Yeah, I can add to that point. So when talking with Inworld, so they already solved the hardest problem, in my opinion, right? Which is for gaming. Then they can easily cater to other use cases, and we've discussed this before. Let's say, for instance, you want to build an agent that can be, an educator for kids, right? You can build that. All you need is basically design the brain, provide the knowledge base, have an avatar that can speak to that knowledge, and basically have it on a platform. Could be a website or anything, right? So they can serve this use case because they already solved a harder problem. So yeah.
Let me ask a selfish question to you both, because we have a lot of portfolio companies here. How is Nvidia engaging with like the games industry at large, other than being a close partner and enabler for Inworld? But like, is there any practical way for portfolio companies that are building in gaming, whether that's platforms, technology that they build, or games, to interact with you, to like work and build relationship with you?
Sure, I can add some color to that. So basically what we do is we build ecosystems of partners that can take the building blocks we provide. So actually, it's not just about hardware, it's about software too, right? So we actually have 75% of our engineers are software focused, not hardware focused. So a lot of these companies approach us because they have a need for a library or a specific framework, etc. Then we engage with them in that sense on the technical aspect, and that leads to a stronger partnership on all the other layers. So it always starts from a need that they have, and sometimes it could be companies we reach out to, for example, like Inworld, right? You can read about a company and see that they have a very solid team, they have an actual product that works and solve real-world problem. So we approach them in order to collaborate together.
Awesome. continued investment in the AI space, AI gaming space, Michael? Like, what's your like investment strategy looking forward? Like, how are you looking at the space?
So we are still likely going to be mainly infrastructure investors in gaming for the time being, but we enjoy and seek to syndicate with investors that have a broader view across and expertise within the operational side of the sector, like BITKRAFT. To me, to your earlier question, the conjunction and kind of like merging of these game-like experiences versus casual, everyday, maybe even productivity experiences is a very strong belief I have. And for what we want to do as the fund, partnering with Microsoft as an optional way of taking it forward, we have now a number of different strategies to employ. One of them could be partnering with Xbox for the distribution and, again, studios' advantages that they have. There's also, the technology infrastructure itself and the partners that Microsoft has accrued. So I think games going forward, flashing forward to the future, are going to be a completely different part of your life than they were when I was, gaming geek growing up. And to that point, having Windows with 1.6 billion client installs, it's just like it's going to happen. It's very difficult to see what kind of company it is, what the experience looks like, but that's definitely it's a key pillar of the investment thesis.
Thank you, Michael. So concluding this, we're pretty much on time. I'm super excited because what I saw here earlier today, like that emerging gameplay that like arises out of the technology being applied, is something that gets me incredibly excited. Like what I saw this morning, I can't stop thinking about what that implies and what that will apply at scale once you also solve like the compute part of it in a more meaningful way, which is another part. When we invested in the company, I really thought it's going to be more straightforward, way more straightforward. But the challenges we encountered and the complexity of what all you have to solve for making that work, it's just incredible. So I'm super excited that Inworld is part of our portfolio. Thank you for sharing all these insights. Michael and Yasmina, you're going to be around for a bit here. So I hope you make good use of that. And for now, I think we'll just open like our catering here for a bit of a lunch. Right? Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Thank you.